Welcome back to the Ascend in Life podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about why first impressions are so powerful. Think about the last time you met somebody for the first time. Before you really knew anything about them, you probably already had some kind of opinion. Maybe you thought they seemed confident. Maybe they seemed nervous. Maybe you thought they were friendly. Or maybe something about them immediately made you think you weren't going to get along. And what's crazy is how quickly that happens. Research has shown that people can begin forming impressions from someone's face in as little as 100 milliseconds. That's 1/10 of a second before you've had an actual conversation with somebody. Their brain is already processing information about you. But that brings up an important question. How accurate are those first impressions? Because there's a big difference between what somebody thinks you are and who you actually are. That's what we're going to talk about today. Why we judge people so quickly. What creates that first impression? Why our first judgment can be completely wrong, and whether it is possible to change somebody's opinion after you've already made a bad first impression. Let's start here. The first truth. How quickly do we form first impressions? Well, like I just mentioned, it can happen extremely fast. Research from Princeton by psychologists Janine Willis and Alexander Todorov found that people were able to make judgments about faces after seeing them for only 100 milliseconds. People were already making assumptions about things such as trustworthiness and competence. Now, obviously, seeing someone's face for 1/10 of a second doesn't mean you actually know that person. That's something I think is important to understand. A first impression is a judgment. It is not necessarily the truth. Because think about how many things could affect someone's behavior the first time you meet them. Maybe they are tired. Maybe they are nervous. Maybe they are just naturally quiet that way. Maybe they are having a bad day. Maybe something happened 5 minutes before they just met you. But you don't know any of that. You only see what's directly in front of you. And your brain starts filling in the missing information. That is one reason first impressions can be completely wrong. Second truth. Why does our brain judge people so quickly? Why would our brain make a decision about somebody when we barely know them? Well, because our brain likes making quick decisions. Humans constantly use mental shortcuts to process huge amounts of information without having to consciously analyze everything around us. When you meet somebody new, your brain starts looking at whatever information it has available: their face, their expression, their posture, their voice, how they are dressed, and how they are acting. And from those small pieces of information, it starts creating a bigger picture. Psychologists sometimes describe this type of rapid judgment as thin slicing. You are basically taking a tiny slice of someone's behavior and trying to understand the entire person from it. And sometimes that can work, but sometimes we are completely wrong because your brain does not have the entire story yet. It's making the best judgment it can with limited information. And that's where biases start becoming important. Third truth. What actually creates a first impression? Now, let's talk about what somebody might actually notice when they first meet you. Obviously, your appearance is one of them. How you are dressed, how you carry yourself, your facial expression. But there's also your body language, your eye contact, your posture, the tone of your voice. and whether you're actually paying attention to the person you're talking to. Think about two people walking into the same job interview. The first person walks in, looking at the floor. They barely make eye contact. They are speaking quietly. They're constantly looking at their phone. Then another person walks in. They are standing upright. They make comfortable eye contact. They put their phone away. They listen when the interviewer talks, and they answer clearly. Before either person has even proven whether they're good at the job, they've already created two completely different impressions. But here's where I think people get this wrong. Confidence doesn't mean being the loudest person in the room. You don't have to dominate every conversation. Sometimes confidence is actually quiet. It's being comfortable with yourself, listening when someone else is talking, making eye contact, and not feeling like you constantly have to prove yourself. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Fourth truth, the halo effect. Now, here's where first impressions can get really interesting. There's something in psychology called the halo effect. Psychologist Edward Thorndike wrote about this effect more than 100 years ago while studying how military officers evaluated soldiers. Basically, one strong positive quality can influence how we judge completely different qualities about someone. Let's say somebody is extremely attractive. Without realizing it, you might also assume they are more intelligent, more successful, more trustworthy, or more confident, even though their appearance hasn't actually proven any of those things. Your brain takes one piece of information and starts filling in the rest, and it can happen in the opposite direction too. One thing you don't like about somebody can influence everything else you think about them. Maybe you don't like the way somebody talks. Now, suddenly, everything they do starts irritating you. Maybe somebody seems rude the first time you meet them. Now you start interpreting their future behavior through that first impression. And that is why I want to ask you something. How many people have you judged based on one thing before you actually even knew them? Seriously, think about it. Because almost all of us have probably done it. Fifth truth, the confirmation bias. And that leads directly into confirmation bias. Once you form an opinion about somebody, your brain can start looking for information that proves you were right. Let's say you meet somebody and immediately think that they are unfriendly. Then a few days later, you walk past them and they don't say anything. Your brain goes, "See, I knew they weren't friendly." But what if they are just tired? What if they didn't see you? What if they're dealing with something personally? You don't know. But because you already created that first impression, their behavior gets interpreted through it. Meanwhile, you might overlook the times when they actually were friendly. That's what makes first impressions so powerful. The first judgment can become a filter for everything that happens afterward. And we need to remember that when we are judging other people too, because sometimes we are not seeing who someone actually is, we are seeing who we've already decided that they are. Sixth truth. Now, do you think it's possible to change a bad first impression? If you said yes, you are right. Research suggests that people's automatic evaluations are not necessarily permanent. New information and repeated experience can change how someone sees you. But here's the important part. You probably aren't going to change someone's opinion by walking up to them and saying, "You are wrong about me." Your actions have to give them new information. Let's say somebody thinks you are unreliable. You can argue with them all day about how reliable you are. Or you can start showing up, be on time, do what you say you are going to do, be consistent, and eventually you are giving them evidence that doesn't match their original impression. The same thing applies if you got off on the wrong foot with somebody. Sometimes simply acknowledging it can help. Maybe you say, "Hey, I know I probably didn't make the best first impression." Then explain what happened if there's actually context they did not know. But after that, let your behavior speak for you, because one interaction might create an impression, but repeated interactions give somebody the opportunity to actually get to know you. Before we wrap up today's episode, I want you to think about this. First impressions are powerful, but they are incomplete. You should absolutely pay attention to how you present yourself, how you treat people, how you communicate, how you carry yourself, because those things matter. But at the same time, remember that you can't understand an entire person from the first few minutes of knowing them. It is exactly like the saying, you should never judge a book by its cover. You should actually open it and read it first. So, I want you to ask yourself a few questions. What impression do you give people when you first meet them? Does that impression actually match who you are? Have you ever completely misjudged somebody when you first met them? And maybe the biggest question, are you judging somebody right now based on one interaction you had with them? Because maybe you don't actually know them yet, and maybe they don't actually know you either. Until next time, stay humble, don't be too quick to judge, keep growing, keep ascending. I'll catch you in the next episode of Ascend in Life.